Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Compelling Conversations podcast. Today, I'm honored to be joined by my English teacher, Miss Snider. Miss Snider, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, where are you joining us from?
I'm home. I'm working from home today.
Oh, cool, cool. Yeah, so it's been a really long time since I've seen you, but I wanted to begin by saying that honestly, and I'm not just saying this to hype you up, but you're my favorite teacher because I would literally walk into your class seeing the world one way, and then I'd walk out seeing it in a totally different light. So yeah, I think that's a really cool thing that you were able to do.
Thank you so much. And of course, you were an amazing student. You didn't talk a lot, but when you did, you always had something fantastic to contribute. You would always take the conversation in a new or interesting way. And I always looked forward to when you would say something in class because it would be interesting. You know, like, what's he going to say? Oh, hadn't thought about that. So it was always really exciting when you would interject or volunteer something.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, yeah, I was a bit more quiet then. Actually, what's interesting is I wasn't that quiet, but being 17, it was still like kind of like finding your footing in the world. So it was like
Right.
in certain situations I'd be a bit more quiet, and then others would be like, oh, just normal. But
Right.
yeah, I guess that's just a part of growing up, huh?
It
Yeah.
is. And in those classes, there's always those who are kind of trying to dominate the conversation, whether they have something significant to say or not. So the more thoughtful people sometimes get drowned out. That
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. I think this moment right now is really interesting because last time I saw you was maybe like 5 years ago or something, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And a person changes so much just on a day-to-day basis. And so right here in this moment in time, this is like the shadow of my life behind me and the shadow of yours behind you. And it's like this is the moment. So I think it's really cool. And that's actually like
Yeah.
the purpose of this podcast, where it's supposed to be kind of like a testament to your time and reality. So I think this is
Mm,
really cool. It's a very unique moment. So
that is
thanks
really,
again for being here. I really appreciate that.
I appreciate you having me. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
yeah. So I wanted to ask, is there, of all the mythologies in the world, is there a particular mythological story that resonates with you the most, and why?
I think it's a little bit cliche, and it gets a lot of press. But I really do like the story of Icarus
Mm,
because it's a story about uh, innovation and getting out there and pushing yourself, but also about hubris and about going too far and doing more than you're supposed to and not heeding the wisdom of those who are older than you or who have been there before, but also still kind of interacting with that, enthusiasm of youth. If he had just listened, he could have done anything, but he didn't, and he died. So I think it's
yeah,
amazing that that story is out there because it still resonates. Youth is still youth, and trying in innovation and enthusiasm, those are universal in young people. You know what I mean? And so I love that story when I was young, and now that I'm, middle aged, I still love that story. I think that it has a lot to teach us about always pushing ourselves and always trying, but also heeding the warnings that are out there and listening to the wisdom of others.
yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Um, I wrote a poem on Icarus, and it had a little bit of a different take, but the
Interesting.
idea was essentially that um, he fell for flying with the false destiny. Because it again, this isn't the Greek interpretation, but Icarus thought he was an angel, and for that he fell. It's like a
Hmm. I
when you
like
ride
that.
along, yeah, the person that journeys with the false destiny will fall, I think. So I
Mm.
think that's an interesting take on that.
It is. And
Yeah.
so because he thought he was an angel, it was almost like he was exceeding his I don't know, actuality in a way that was damaging. Is that
Let me pull out the poem. I think it might be a little more self-explanatory. It's actually not that long, so um By the way, I also see that like now that I'm a little older, I see that with old people. Like when I look at them, I'm like, when you're younger, you kind of just cast them aside, like, oh, whatever. But then like sometimes you sit down and you look at them and you're like, wow, there's quite a bit there, you know?
Right. Yeah, they're almost invisible, but they're the ones with
Yeah.
all the sort of cultural knowledge. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. The poem I wrote was, I have seen men fall for flying with false destinies. Icarus was no angel, and his greatest sin was pretending to be. So that's one of the things that I got out of it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's so like concise and to the point. Reminds me of like a Stephen Crane poem. That's fantastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Do you have a favorite poem?
Actually, one of my favorite poems is by Stephen Crane. It's
Mm.
A Man Said to the Universe, and it's a man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist." And the universe replies, "That has not created in me a sense of obligation."
Ooh.
Like the universe is going to owe us nothing, that we have to carve
Yeah.
out our own destiny.
Yeah, that's pretty deep. Wow. Do you think that now that you're older as well, that the allure of destiny, do you think it fades or do you think it just intensifies?
Destiny's so fascinating because one can't cheat destiny, right?
Yeah.
No matter what we do, that was what destiny had in store for us. So no matter how
Yeah.
we try to evade it, it's still destiny trapping us in its grander plan. So for me, it's almost like well, what does destiny have in store for me? Whatever I do was my destiny. So there's a sense of freedom in that, because I can't escape it, right? Wherever we end
Yeah.
up is where we were, quote, meant to end up if one believes in destiny. Um,
Mm.
so it feels very freeing to say, really, my life's my own. And then looking back, we can say that was destiny.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was Soren Kierkegaard. He said something along those lines where like life can only be lived forward but understood backwards.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
But do you think that the allure of destiny fades or intensifies as you continue on in life?
What do you mean, the allure?
Um, well, in the past couple of years, I've been like really attracted to the idea of destiny and kind of like seeing where it goes. But now it's like that flame has kind of died down, where it's more like I'll just go with the flow, I'll let go, kind of a thing.
I think well, okay, for me personally, it sounds like the same thing for you. It has died down a little bit. Like you understand you're going to carve out what you carve out and that you're making it as you go along. And it's going to be what it's going to be. And I go through phases where sometimes I'm like, I have to make this thing happen. And other times I'm like, what happens, happens. You know what I mean? And so, like, an interesting way of framing it as destiny. But I think it's more about like living in the present rather than maybe the future. Like, so if I'm living
Mm,
in the present, I'm like, go with the flow. If I'm thinking of the future and future me and future Jessi, that that's me. Then I'm living sort of like, well, what will my destiny be? It's like a grander vision of the world. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. What do you think your destiny might be, if you don't mind me asking?
Like what are my dreams still? Like what could it be? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
Well, I've been writing and I'm hoping to publish novels for the rest of my life. We'll see if it happens because I don't have as much time to write as I would like. But for me, my destiny would be to be able to tell my stories. And they're always changing, of course, but to be able to put those out in the world, that would be sort of my legacy. What I leave behind would be like that. Of course, and my children and whatnot. But that would be my destiny to like leave something tangible beyond just sort of the interactions I've had in the world. What about you?
Wow. I really like that. Honestly, something along the same lines, I'd say. I recently wrote a book. And
Did
so,
you?
yeah, yeah. And so again, I see that you mentioned the word tangible. I really like that word. I think in a way, it is your testament to your time and reality. So one of the ways I see it also is before I would read like a lot of my old writings and I'd like really just get lost in them. But now it's more like when I write a thing, it's its own thing. It has its own life and I rarely look back. But it's
Interesting.
like a piece of me is still there though. There's still
Right.
some semblance of truth, but it's not me anymore. So I kind of see like writing like that and that book is kind of like that. That story, it's like a piece of me is there. It's not quite all of me though. Keep on. I keep on changing. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I think it's
Yeah.
Leotard that says we return to our, no, it's Bart who says we return to our writing as strangers. Like you were in that moment and in that story and creating it, but then when you come back to it, sometimes it's hard to believe you even wrote it, right? Like it's like, wow,
Yeah. Yeah.
I said that.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, sometimes I really have to look at things like, wow. But I don't judge myself. I'm still like, well, that was me once upon a time. So
Right,
even if like now I think it's childish or lame, it's like, well, once upon a time it was very true to me. So I
right.
respect that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to this whole thing about destiny,
Mhm.
um, and you're talking about your past self, your future self, your present self.
Mhm.
Marcus Aurelius says something interesting about how like all things have already happened and they're going to continue to happen. The only moment you have is the present moment, and it's in this moment that everything's also happening. So that gives me some sense of serenity, or like peace, where going back to that idea of just like letting go or going with the flow. But of course, life happens, and sometimes you get nervous because something didn't work out the way you want it to. How do you deal with that?
Well, I actually use a principle that Marcus Aurelius is famous for, which is Stoicism. I always try to remember um, what can I control and what's out of my control. And if I've done everything I can to control that which I can control, then that's all I can do. I have to
Mhm.
let go of the rest. I can't harp on it. I can't dwell on it. I can't let it bring me down. And I've even started doing this thing like I heard about it on a podcast. It's a stoic exercise. So if I'm, sitting in traffic and I'm going to be late and it's upsetting me, and I stop and I say, no, this is a stoic test. How well can I accept that no matter how upset I get, traffic's not going to move any quicker? What value comes of me being upset? All I'm doing is hurting myself by getting upset. I can sit here and think about something else. I can enjoy the air. I can, listen to my breathing. Excuse me. I can literally do anything else. And that's more productive than being upset about something I can't control. So for me, that's the thing is like I can control always my effort, my attitude. Beyond that, I don't have a lot of control, and I just have to accept that. And sometimes it's not easy, but I'm
Yeah,
constantly working on it.
yeah. No, that's admirable. Um, Stoicism is definitely a great philosophy, I think, in aiding with that. Do you remember how you were introduced to Stoicism and why it came into your life?
I don't. I don't. Um, but I've really embraced it. I mean, I've read, a good bit about it in the last maybe decade or so, but I don't remember. Maybe in an intro to philosophy class. I'm not really sure, but I find so much value in it because a lot of philosophy is very esoteric. It's out
Yeah.
there, and you're like, oh, that's cool, not really relevant to anything, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but Stoicism is like applicable.
Yeah.
I mean, you can literally use it every day because things don't go our
Mhm.
way every day, And so it's nice to have something to fall back on, like, can't do anything about that. Bills went up, can't do anything about that right now. My whatever it is, my writing isn't getting a response as quickly as I would like. Can't do anything about that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Just control what you can.
Yeah. In a lot of the stories of the Western tradition, it seems like they're founded on tragedy and they end in tragedy. But that concept of destiny is still very much evident in them.
Mm.
Um, and then, we tell stories about ourselves. So do you think that we've identified destiny as a tragic thing?
Mm. Yes, I do. I probably do. I mean, it depends on somebody's belief system. But I think that if one thinks of death as final, then that can be a tragedy. If one is
Mm.
uncertain about the afterlife in some way, it can be like, well, this is the end, so this is sort of a tragedy. And it's interesting. I heard a saying today. It was something like the stories we tell ourselves can trap us or free us. And I think
Yeah.
and I think if we choose to see our story as coming to this final end and death is always this horrible thing, then it's always going to be a tragedy. Fate is always going to be this
Yeah.
negative. But if we live in the moment or the present, as you were saying, or if we do have like a grander sort of vision of the world, depending on your perspective, those things can make it seem far less tragic. But I do agree with you. The West is very kind of almost obsessed with tragedy.
Yeah.
We
Why do you
dwell on
think
it.
that might be?
I don't know. I guess because life is hard, and people try to come up with ways of explaining that or working through it, or making people feel like they're not alone in their suffering.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess we come up with different ways of expressing it, but I don't think it actually alleviates the actual suffering that anyone goes through. So I don't see necessarily the great value in harping on it so much.
Yeah.
Hmm. It's interesting.
Is there a particular like Anglo-Saxon story that interests you? Or of the
I mean,
Viking Age? Yeah.
I love. I know it's a cliche, but I love Beowulf. I do, and
Mm.
the thing about Beowulf is, the only thing he has going for him is that he's brave. He's not intellectual. He's not that smart. He's not, which is the opposite of Odysseus, of course, who's clever. His thing is he's
Yeah.
clever. Beowulf is just brave, and I think that if you uh, I think that there's some value in that because I think a lot of times today, or people like me and probably like you, we tend to maybe over intellectualize things sometimes, and sometimes it's just about taking a chance. Sometimes it's just
Yeah.
about saying, no, I'm just going to go in there and do the thing, whatever it is. And I think that Beowulf can teach us a lot about like just standing up for things and going and doing what's right, saving the village, doing what you need to do, and not sitting back and waiting for someone else to do it. Like just no, you go be the one that does it. Just go do it,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. No, that's really cool. It's I've never really regarded Beowulf with that much interest, but the way that you posed it right now, it's like, wow, that is really interesting.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
just great. Not smart.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you have like a great interest with like, Victorian era stories and really just anything of like the old English tradition. Of all those stories, is there a particular one that's your favorite?
um, my very favorite story and novel, it's actually one we read when you were in 12th grade. It's Jane Eyre. And the
Mm.
reason is it's because she is not exceptional. She's bright, but she's small and plain and just hardworking and good. And so she thinks if she just lives a good life and works hard, that good things will come, and they do. And her destiny in that book is to end up with Rochester, but it's almost not the point. The point is for her to go through all these trials and tribulations and just be a steadfast, good person who never gives up. And so I like that she's not exceptional because so many times we get these heroes that are like larger than life. Well, it's easy to like the person who's larger than life. You know what it's not easy to like is the short, small, pale orphan girl. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it the person who's not the person who's like standing out or that everyone notices, like that's a cool story to me. I like things that are a little bit off the beaten path in terms of the story itself. And she's not your typical hero either.
Mm. Do you see something of yourself in that story?
I mean, I'm small and pale. Yeah, so I do to a certain extent. I mean, I think, I had a family and whatnot, so I don't have the same sort of horrible upbringing or whatever. But I do think that you work with what you have, you
Yeah.
find yourself where you are and work with what you've got. And it's not going to look the same for all of us. But you just have to go out there and say, like, what I have is enough. I'm going to make it work for me. And I think some people get very caught up, especially in like today's, time with TikTok and Instagram and all these things that can make people feel, I don't know, inferior in various ways. I hate that because you still have so much to offer. Each one of us has so much to offer the world. And you can't look around and say, well, I'm not that person and I don't have that money and I don't have that, I don't know, 6 foot to 110 pounds stature. None of that stuff matters. You have enough. Everybody has enough. Just tap your talents, you know?
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads on to the importance of art and symbolism because we're drawn to those stories where, we do see something of ourselves in them and that it's
Mhm.
okay that we might not be just like that hero or that heroine, but we have something to offer, we have something to give. And it reminds me actually of you're talking about like again with the Beowulf and how to just do the thing.
Yeah.
Soren Kierkegaard, he has this interesting book called The Lily of the Field and the Bird of the Air.
Hmm.
And when he published that book in 1849, what did he know? that, a little under 200 years later, there'd be this Pakistani American guy in Texas who reads that and finds that to be some sort of inspiration. You just
Right.
never know the extent of art.
Right.
Even the people that came up with Beowulf, they could never have imagined this. This is a new world that we're living in. They didn't even know it existed. Or maybe they did, I don't know, but
Absolutely.
just the extent of art, and just courage can create things that we could never see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we create it and put it out there, um, I forget who says it, but our art is our child. I think it's Bart again. You give birth to something, an author
Yeah.
or even a painter, and it's the world's child. Like it goes out and lives a life independent of you. You created it, but it lives on in various ways that you can't anticipate, you may not understand, but you've given the world this thing. And it keeps on giving in many instances. And it may even mean things different than what you meant it to mean. But that's okay too, because that's what art does, right? It proliferates and it speaks different meanings and it people will read into it different things and you have no control over that. You can't anchor that meaning or control that art. And that's sort of the beauty of it, right? Like you don't
It
know what's going to
is.
happen
Yeah.
with your
Yeah. It's also a little scary to be honest, but
art.
it's like that
Misinterpreted.
thing, the courage, it's just like you just
Right.
have to do it and it is what it is.
Right.
So yeah, this is why actually I really admire Stan Lee because the man created his own mythology, right? And like we're talking like people talk about Spider-Man, he's not even real, but we talk about him, and it's like just the power that that one man had. And if you like look into the story of how he came about creating Spider-Man, it's like he took a chance, he just did it. You never know what happens. So it's really cool.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Going back to philosophy, um, is there a particular philosopher that you really admire and why?
So I really like the postmodernists, and there are people love to hate them, but I love them. I mean, I've quoted Bart twice, I think. So um, it so I'm talking about like Foucault and like Derrida and Lyotard. So those late 20th century, mostly French philosophers. I like them because they looked around at the world and they said all these things that we think we understand, we don't. We can take them apart at the level of language and we can explain presence and metaphysics and absence in these ways that we didn't know were possible through language. And I just feel like applying them to everything can be very illuminating. Of course, they're not, universally applicable, and there's room to criticize everything, including them, which many people have, of course. But I think if you look at like what happened with art and literature and everything else in the 20th century, it's testament to how the world was rapidly changing, and they gave us a really fantastic lens for continuing to sort of evaluate the way the world was changing and the way the world will continue to change. I think they're still sort of we can still use them even today.
Hmm, that's
Like I
interesting.
mean, for example, Foucault gave us the fact. I think we talked about this in one of the classes. I think maybe in 11th grade for you. Um, like the school system is set up like a factory or prison. All the institutions have similar sort of dynamics, and it's the disciplining of the body and the mind. You come in, you sit down, you face forward. I get to stand up, you don't, because there's a certain authority structure in place, and we have to discipline people into thinking a certain way and responding a certain way. So then they go from the school system into the work system, and they're also disciplined and kind of in place. They know their place there and they listen to the authority and they do what they're supposed to do. And I mean, if you look at the school and the corporate world, it's similar. And what's really neat right now is all this work from home stuff. The reason the CEOs and all these sort of executives hate it is because it breaks that dynamic. They can't stand that people are home and thinking freely and independent and comfortable. They're not in their uncomfortable work clothes and their work shoes, and they aren't knowing their place, and their bodies are not being physically disciplined. Their minds are not in that spot. It's a lot of freedom. And if you'll notice, the people that keep criticizing it are the people up here who have all that freedom. It's not the people, most of the people who are workers. I know some young people
Yeah.
really do prefer the office, but you know, in about 10 years, y'all won't. After you've been in there long enough, you'll want to go home too. But it's really interesting because in this moment, we're seeing how the systems of discipline and control, how they want to maintain that control and how people are sort of evading it and how it's causing like a lot of problems, causing a generational divide that's going to be really interesting to watch play out.
Yeah, that is interesting. I never really thought about that. Well, actually, I did think about that, but the way that you articulate it is very fascinating. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, Jim Morrison, there's an interview that he has where he says that when he was a teenager, it was just a very ordinary thing. And it's transformed into this thing where now it's like when you're young, when you are that teenager, it's supposed to be the epitome of life. Um, do you think what do you think about that? Do you think it's conducive to a person's growth or not really, epitomizing a certain age or a certain time in your life?
Yeah, I think they call it like the invention of adolescence or whatever. Like at some point we label something, and then people
Yeah.
within that begin to think of it in a certain way, and they think I'm supposed to feel this, and I'm supposed to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm supposed to have these types of experiences. And then if they don't, they feel like there's a loss, and if they do, they feel complete. And I feel like they're again, this is one of those stories, right? Like the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves can trap us. Well, if you think your life is supposed to look like X, Y, and Z because you're 17 years old and it doesn't, you could feel deprived. But I feel like sometimes that stuff is very constraining. Like sometimes we should try to let that go and say, what does my life look like in terms of what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, what's going on in my family, in my community, in my whatever, and kind of release some of that. But of course, I do think there are some truths to it, like the fact that the brain isn't fully done developing until around 25, 26. That's a good thing to know because people who are 15 making decisions are still very, very young in terms of decision making abilities. And sometimes we forget that. We're like, you have an adult body, you're an adult. No, that's not the case. So I do think there are values. And the more we understand about age and expectations, but I do think some cultural values and cultural stories and how well we match up to them or don't can be problematic. Because I do think people can pathologize their ability to fit in or not. And I think we have to be careful with that.
I like that. Are you at all familiar with the concept of pure eternus in Jungian psychology?
What is it?
Pure eternus.
No.
Okay. Well, it's it's supposed to be like a child god, and in modern through a modern lens, it would be something like a man child.
Mm,
And I feel like in today's day and age, like that concept of pure eternus, it's intensifying in people,
mm,
where there's a lot of like grown-ups that act childlike.
mm,
And I feel like everybody has serpents and dragons in themselves and in their lives that they need to overcome.
mm,
And I don't think pure eternus is a serpent or a dragon, but I think it is something that needs to be overcome. It's kind of
mm,
like a snitch in Harry Potter. It's that like one little thing that it's so hard to get. But once you get it, it changes everything.
mm.
So that's just something interesting
So
that
do you think it's a
I
bad
got.
thing that people are retaining elements of childhood or youth into adulthood?
It's kind of like that Peter Pan thing where they just want to remain young forever. Like
Mm,
I'm speaking more so from like a recent experience where I feel like there has been a depth of the pure eternus in me. It's not something that I like intentionally tried to overcome, but it happened. And it
interesting.
happened because I had the courage to do certain things. I wrote a book, and for me that's a very big thing. So it's like,
Yeah.
wow, like I kind of just have that space to just exist. And in that space, it's like there's a lot of things in the past that just kind of disappeared,
Mm,
So it's just something that I've been thinking about lately, growing up, and how a person changes so frequently. It's insane to
mm,
me how frequently a person changes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting because so many people, even at your age, are still incredibly, I don't want to use the word childish, it has like negative connotations, but did I mute it?
No, no, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. No, they're incredibly immature, I guess. So maybe being more mature, it almost it might feel like maybe not youth specifically, but people are like they don't fit in or they don't feel like they connect with the people their age. And I think that this is just one of those things that have crept up. People are being acting younger, older, and then they're judging the people who are actually growing up in a negative way. And I think, again, this is one of those things where people need to be themselves. If you still feel, silly and immature at 21, that's okay. And if you feel very adult because you've just written a book and your life is coming together and you're changing quickly into this adult, then that should be okay too.
Yeah, no, I like that. I wanted to point out I don't feel very adult. I it's a strange time for me. I can't quite articulate it, but I do like what you said. You
You
know,
start
it's
you
like
so it's very transitional for you right now. Like you're becoming something, but you're not quite there.
yeah, it's a metamorphosis, it's just uh, you're always figuring something out every day, right? And
Absolutely.
sometimes things go the way you want them to, and sometimes they just don't. And in the
Hmm.
midst of all that, you're just wondering who you are. Yeah,
I love that.
yeah. Um, do you have a favorite musician?
Oh, actually, Prince.
Really? And why is that?
Prince. Oh gosh, his songs are so funky, and he can play so many instruments, and they're catchy, and they're dance, and they're ballads, and um, they're wild and random. And I also like David Bowie a lot, so he's probably number two.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
cool.
they're my
Were
favorite.
you were you ever into grunge?
I was a little bit, yeah.
Really? That's
Hmm.
interesting. Is there
Yeah.
a particular band in grunge that you were drawn to?
I liked, I mean, not to again be cliche, but I liked Nirvana a lot. I liked Pearl Jam. I liked Green Day, Weezer. They were all good.
That's really cool. I feel like music is also something that kind of like reveals to you like who you're becoming and who you are and whatnot. Because I
Yeah.
remember when I had my grunge phase, so to speak, it was very like I could feel that. Like I
Mhm.
feel like grunge. I think Kurt Cobain even talked about how there's like a very like an angry, impatient thing about it.
Mm.
And so when you're hearing that music, it kind of just like riles you up. And so I could feel that, and when that phase kind of like had its twilight, I could feel that as well. It was just interesting.
That is
Yeah.
interesting.
Is
Yeah,
there
like
like
what
an
speaks
yeah.
to us is always different, right?
Yes, yes. Is there a musician right now that you're listening to is there a phase of music that you're in right now?
Um, well, because I need to do so much kind of thinking or grading or writing without lyrics distracting me. I've been listening to a lot of techno mixes, and I like the intricacy of the beats and the mixes and the changing up and the rhythm. It keeps me very focused without distracting me with my brain grabbing onto the words and trying to figure out what they're saying or what they're singing about. And so it's good to have like minimal techno in the background. It helps me stay focused and write.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't expect that, but that's really cool. Yeah, it's interesting.
Kind of random, right?
Yeah. Are there any particular artists that you're drawn to?
No, I mean I just listen to mixes like I like mixes by Relay One and a few other people that put out techno mixes. I just listen to them because they go on for like 2 or 3 hours and I don't have to worry about it, and so I can just zone in and let that beat sort of play while I think. It's
Hmm.
fantastic.
How about like painters or sculptors? Are there any of those that you're interested in?
Ah, I'm always kind of looking for new things. I guess I don't get into, I have this issue with the artist as such. I try not to
Hmm.
focus on like an artist because I feel like they can anchor a work. Like if I'm like, this artist is producing stuff, so therefore their work has value inherently. I think that's a problem because it bleeds onto the work and says, this is good because this person produced it. And I never want to be in that space. I never want to give value to a work because of who produced it or devalue a work because of who produced it. My next door neighbor could produce a work and to me, it could speak to something deep in me that I, didn't even understand. And a great artist could produce something and I can look at it and feel nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I just try to let the works speak to me. So I'm always trying to discover new works, individual pieces that move something in me or make me think or feel a certain thing or make me appreciate the aesthetic or whatever it is in that work happens to do. But I'm always looking for individual pieces, and I'm very kind of almost actively resisting the urge to anchor it with an artist.
Wow. That's very novel to me. That's very fascinating. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, Miss Snyder, it's been an awesome conversation. Do you have
Yeah.
any closing thoughts? Anything that you wanted to say but you felt like you didn't get a chance to, or anything on your mind that you wanted to express?
No, I just want to say, don't embarrass you, but I'm incredibly proud of you. You're a phenomenal young man, and I'm so proud of the fact that you wrote a book. And look at you, you're doing this podcast, and you're amazing. And I bet your future is bright, and there's no stopping you. So I'm just proud of you. That's all.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I appreciate that, and I wish you nothing but the best as well. I mean, I honestly have to say that, yeah, like, again, I'm not trying to hype you up, but you are my favorite teacher. I mean,
Ah,
you really did change my life in a way. The way I saw the
oh,
world, it's transformed. So it's really cool,
that is
you
so
know?
sweet. That's all a
Yeah.
teacher ever wants to hear.
Yeah. I forgot to ask actually, is there like a particular movie though that you really like? Because I remember you were really into films as well.
Oh, I am. Oh gosh, there's so many. I don't
Too
know if
many, right? Yeah.
I
Way
don't
too
know if there's
many.
anything recent that just has really moved me. I don't think there is anything recent. It's all the same old ones, probably. What
Yeah. Yeah. No,
about
that's
you?
that's
What's a movie you like so I can check it out?
good question. Good question. I've always been a fan of the Pirates films. They've always been like my favorites. But I really like the movie Troy. I know it's not like
Oh,
as accurate to the stories, but I think Brad Pitt's performance as Achilles is just very like spot on, and just that story again, going back to what we've been talking about,
yeah,
destiny, being remembered, all that. I
absolutely.
think it's just Wolfgang Peterson. I think his vision was just a really beautiful vision in that film. So
Yeah.
that's one that really resonates with me a lot.
Isn't it neat how that ancient story still has resonance?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
fascinating. Stories have power.
yeah. And my story, actually, the book I wrote, it's a twist on that. Believe it or not, it's a
Really?
twist on, yeah, the story of Achilles.
Okay.
So that's one that I'm really drawn to.
That's exciting.
Yeah. But thanks so much again, Miss Snyder, for being here. It was an
Well,
awesome
thank you for having me.
conversation. Yeah, I was honored. I appreciate it. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.
Bye.